The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. We just did our Veterans Day ceremony. A few days after November the 11th, the traditional time to do it, but it's the nearest Sunday we could manage for various reasons. It's to honor all those who have fought in wars, not just those who've died, but all those who survived also, many of whom still have a great deal of suffering, as we know. Honoring them and offering them our gratitude and merit. Well, November the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, in 1911. No, it wasn't 19, it was 1918, sorry. 1918, but the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month is when they declared the end to war. And for many years after that, there'd always be a 2-minute silence on that day at 11 o'clock to remember all those who died. I don't think you do that anymore in Britain, but it's kind of a pity. Everything would screech to a halt, and people would just be quiet for 2 minutes to remember all those who died. It was supposed to be the war that ends all wars, but of course it didn't end all wars. It was a horrible, really bloody, awful war because they didn't know how to fight with the new weapons. They just slaughtered each other. And of course there have been many wars since. There are still wars going on now, as we know. We don't have a war here that threatens us directly, but there are so many wars going on in our world. So much bloodshed, so many refugees, so much suffering. So we offer merit. Well, here now in the United States we don't have a war, but there's lots of violence and lots of hatred and disharmony, as we know. There's a pandemic which is still growing, and we don't see any end in sight. It's just alarming. And there's also the difficult political situation. At the moment, it was resolved, but it's difficult at the moment, so people are worried. Plus there's climate change, there's racism, and all the other things that go on, both in the world and in our own lives. We have our own sufferings as well, never mind all that. So people are worried and upset, and it's very understandable. So how do we come to peace with it all? How do we find peace within it? It can seem as though it's our moral duty to be all embroiled in all the turmoil, and that we should be upset about everything. But we don't have to, and it doesn't help. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We don't have to be all upset and angry and fearful and so on. It is not our moral responsibility to be constantly upset about everything that's going on in the world. Although, if you look at the news too much, you can think so. But actually, we don't have to do that. It doesn't help. We can care deeply about our world, about beings, and we can be still at the same time. It's not selfish. Actually, it's a practice of unselfishness. In the time of the Buddha, there were wars going on. There were kingdoms fighting. His own kingdom fought another kingdom. And as I said before, twice he was able to stop them fighting. And the third time he had to just let them do it. He said, I can't stop this. It's a karmic thing. I just have to let them do it. I cannot stop them. Knowing that his kinsmen would die and other people would die, he couldn't do everything. He couldn't prevent that bloodshed. But what he could do was teach the Dharma, the way to deal with the hatred and fear and violence within ourselves. And this is to cut it at the root, because war just comes out of fear and hatred and violence and ignorance and all that. And if we can deal with it in ourselves, then we're not adding to it. Reverend Master Jiyu going to Japan, I think I mentioned this recently. In the introduction to the Wild White Goose, she says, I thought I was angry, I'd just had World War II, my friends had been killed, And I wanted to find out why was there war and violence and hatred. And then she says, I realized that I had to find the seeds of those within myself. It was myself that I needed to work on, not to fix the world, but to do something about myself. And this was life-changing for her, to realize it's not a matter of fixing the world, it's a matter of doing something about oneself. A huge help. So we all do have anger and fear and so on. We all have feelings. And we're not trying to squash them down or pretending they're not there. That doesn't help. We have feelings about injustice, hatred, people being killed, people helpless, We don't want to cut ourselves off. We want to care about beings. We want to care about the suffering in the world. And it's normal to feel upset when we hear something that worries us. However, what we can do is recognize that upset feeling and sit still with it. Not in spite of it, not against it, not trying to get rid of it, but to sit still with it, with our upset, our fear, our anger, our anxiety, our discomfort. Accepting it as completely as we can, to accept it. Not judging our upset feeling, I shouldn't feel this way, but just sitting still and letting it be there. Not feeding it, just sitting still and letting it be there. This is a large part of what we do, just sit still with whatever comes our way, whether it's internal or external, sitting still right within it and accepting it as completely as we can. And not acting on it, not acting on our upset. Recognizing it helps us to be careful, not to act on our upset. This does not mean we don't do anything about the suffering in our world, or that we don't care. But it does mean that we are also trying to work on our own fear and anger and hatred and so forth, and not add more. To work on ourselves, to take responsibility for our own feelings, not to blame it on somebody else, or the world, or those people over there, but to take responsibility. If I'm angry and I follow it, it's a choice. I've chosen to foster anger, but I don't have to do that. To recognize our upset, that's the essential thing. First of all, I'm getting angry. Be careful. To take care with what we say and do, and try not to feed the anger with our thoughts, as I said. It takes a lot of the energy out of our upset feeling when we simply recognize it for what it is. Because otherwise we tend to get carried along with it, thinking it's true, it's real, making it real for us, identifying ourselves with this cause, justifying our anger. And actually, we don't need to do that. I've talked about this a lot, actually, both not so fairly recently and also in the past, sitting still with our feelings. And often I've talked about sitting still with fear and anger and so forth, more from the personal level of the small fears and irritations of our own daily lives. But when people are afraid or angry about something bigger, like a pandemic or something, it can seem as though all that just goes out the window because it's so big, much bigger thing. Well, that's all very well, my own little irritation, but look at this. I need to get angry about this because this is really serious. But actually, it's just the same thing, really, on a larger scale, Getting angry about a big thing is the same as getting angry about a little thing. And we can treat it in the same way. And yes, by all means, take action if you feel you need to take action. I'm not saying don't do that. But try not to do it with an angry or righteous mind. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything about the problems in our world, but just be careful and follow the Dharma. As Reverend Master Jiu said, the way to do something about hatred and war is to do something about ourselves, to see the hatred and violence and fear within ourselves and do something about that. Sit still with that and not just act on it. Meditation, our great aid. Sitting still in the midst of all the conditions of our lives, no matter what, whether it's a big thing or a little thing, sitting still in the midst of it, it can only help. When you find our mind fixated on something, or all upset, sit still with that. It's not something that's separate from our practice. It is our practice to sit still right in the midst of all these conditions, no matter how justified we might think we are in getting upset, whether it's an interpersonal thing or whether it's a global thing or whatever it might be. Sit still with that. Keeping to the precepts as best we can. Sometimes we might find ourselves saying things about somebody we don't even know, in a way we would never talk about somebody we do know. Keeping to the precepts, they apply to everything we do, and everything we say, everything we think. The precepts apply to everything. We don't just think, well, this is bigger than that. The Dharma encompasses everything. Kindness. This is one thing we can all practice. Everybody can practice kindness. We can treat others with kindness in our actions, in our speech, in our thoughts. Don't say, oh, I'm just an angry person, I can't do that. We can do that. We have a choice. We always have a choice. We can try to recognize our angry, judgmental thoughts and think of other people with kindness, with compassion, not fostering that anger and hatred. Think of them with kindness. Somebody we don't like, try to think of them with kindness. Would I want to be that person? Maybe they're suffering. What do I know? I'm not them, When we find ourselves making judgments about anybody, can we find a little bit of compassion for them, whether we know them or not? Maybe they're suffering deeply, and they don't know how to deal with it, other than getting angry and hateful. We don't know. Can we just have a little compassion, give them the benefit of the doubt, and not just see them as a bad, horrible person I'm justified in hating? That doesn't get us anywhere. Offering merit, including merit for those we don't like or we don't agree with. Everybody needs merit, especially those who are creating disharmony. They need merit, because if you're creating disharmony, you're lacking harmony within yourself. If you have harmony within yourself, you can create harmony around you. Kindness, if we're kind to people, they tend to be kind back, and kind to others. It spreads. If we're unkind and unharmonious, that spreads too. What do we want to spread in our world? Do we want to spread disharmony, hatred, ill feeling, misunderstanding? No, we want to spread kindness, harmony, compassion, wisdom, because it is contagious. Offering merit, especially merit, well, yes, as I've said that. Practicing faith. Faith in the three treasures. Taking refuge in the three treasures. I talked about that recently. Refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Faith in the teachings of the Buddha that help us to practice kindness, to let go of hatred. As the Buddha said, hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is appeased by love. This is an eternal law. Taking refuge in the Buddha and his teaching. It was true then, it's true now. True in all the times since, with all the wars and all the hatred and all the oppression, violence, unkindness that has been going on for thousands of years. Hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is appeased by love. This is an eternal law. Refuge in the Buddha and his teachings, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha. Those who try to practice those teachings. Faith in the great matter, unborn Buddha nature, that which sustains us all, which embraces us all and all our mistakes, all our hatred and violence, our selfishness, our fear, embraces all of it. It all takes place within that. None of it is separate, none of it is outside, none of it is unacceptable, none of it is to be turned away from. All of it takes place within that. to sit still with all of these uncomfortable, painful things, sitting still within the great matter for which we train, with all these uncomfortable things, within that great matter that sustains everything. Venerable Mahaghosananda. Step by step, we've talked about this a number of times before. It's a lovely book, quite short. And he says, there is no self, there are only causes and conditions. Therefore, to struggle with ourselves and others is useless. The wise ones know that the root causes and conditions of all conflicts are in the mind. Victory creates hatred. Defeat creates suffering. The wise ones wish for neither victory nor defeat. We can oppose selfishness with the weapon of generosity. We can oppose ignorance with the weapon of wisdom. We can oppose hatred with the weapon of loving kindness. And about making peace. If anybody knew about making peace, if anybody doesn't know who Venerable Mahaghosananda was, he was a Cambodian patriarch who, during the terrible civil war in Cambodia, would go around the camps of refugees preaching peace, loving kindness, teaching people to practice loving kindness and non-hatred. And it made an enormous difference, so that after the war there wasn't the horrible leftover of mutual hatred and revenge that there might have been, because he was teaching loving kindness and peace. He was in danger, considerable danger a lot of the time, but he didn't worry, he just went on and survived all of it. Non-action is the source of all action. There is little we can do for peace in the world without peace in our minds. And so, when we begin to make peace, we begin with silence, meditation and prayer. Peacemaking requires compassion. It requires the skill of listening. To listen, we have to give up ourselves, even our own words. We listen until we can hear our peaceful nature. As we learn to listen to ourselves, we learn to listen to others as well, and new ideas grow. There is an openness, a harmony. As we come to trust one another, we discover new possibilities for resolving conflicts. When we listen well, we will hear peace growing. Peacemaking requires mindfulness. There is no peace with jealousy, self-righteousness, or meaningless criticism. We must decide that making peace is more important than making war. Peacemaking requires selflessness. It is selflessness taking root. To make peace, the skills of teamwork and cooperation are essential. There is little we can do for peace, as long as we feel that we are the only ones who know the way. A real peacemaker will strive only for peace, not for fame, glory, or even honor. Striving for fame, glory, or honor will only harm our efforts. Peacemaking requires wisdom. Peace is a path that is chosen consciously. It is not an aimless wandering, but a step-by-step journey. Peacemaking is the middle path of equanimity, non-duality, and non-attachment. Peacemaking means the perfect balance of wisdom and compassion, and the perfect meeting of humanitarian needs and political realities. It means compassion without concession and peace without appeasement. Loving kindness is the only way to peace. And I think I'll leave it there with Venerable Mahaghosananda. I don't think we can improve on that. For ourselves, in our own lives, and in our world, may there be peace. Thank you. A little addendum. I want to say that the best way, I think, that we can honor our veterans, those who've died or survived wars, is to practice peace, foster peace, so that their efforts and their lives are not wasted, but that we can practice peace in our own lives and in all that we do in every way we can. Thank you.